On the second line of your staff, what we're going to go ahead and get used to is we're going to get used to the lines and the space notes of the bass clef, just because that's going to be our focus. And so I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here. Of course, on your staff paper, you won't be able to necessarily zoom in, but what we'll end up doing is we'll start by first again drawing that bass clef. So again, a dot on the fourth line where F is usually. Then we curve up to the top line and then straight down. Okay. And again, we usually stop at the bottom line there. And then we have, of course, the two dots, one here on the third space and then the fourth space. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the lines first. Okay, there are going to be three things that we're going to go ahead and write. So the first thing that we're going to end up writing is we're going to end up writing the numbers of the lines. Then what we'll do is we'll write the note itself, and then we will then write the letter underneath it. So it'll look something like this, and we'll do this for all of the notes moving forward, okay? So for example, and I'm gonna go ahead and just use different colors so it's easier to see, but we have 1, okay? Then what we'll do is we'll draw the note. So again, this is a line note. So, and when you're drawing these notes are oftentimes a lot smaller than we think. So just make sure to keep these notes quite small. I'm not going to fill mine in. I'm just going to go ahead and keep it as a whole note here. But we have line number 1, which is this note, which is a G. Okay, so the lowest note on the bass clef, which is a G. Now, keep in mind that this is not the G that's just below middle C. Okay, middle C is all the way, of course, up here, right? And that distance is quite wide, although it doesn't look like that much of a distance. And we'll see that there's actually another G, which is the G below middle C, up here towards the top of the bass staff. Now, after that, we'll go ahead and do the rest of them. So number 2, we have this note on the line, and this note is B. Again, in terms of the process here, we're skipping over the space note in the middle, which technically that would be the next letter, right? It should be G, A, and then B, but since we're skipping over it, it's going to be B here. So again, we're going to keep going with that same process. The third note, and again, if you get ahead of me, that's perfectly fine. Third note, we have here on the line, it's D, and then we have the fourth, that's F, and then the fifth, which is A. Okay, now these are the 5 line notes. And make sure, of course, that you give yourself enough room towards the end, because, of course, we're going to have 4 more space notes. But we have the 5 line notes of the bass clef, G, B, D, and F. Now, there's a variety of mnemonic devices that we use to memorize this, among which there's specifically this one, which is Girls Buy Diamonds from Alaska. I'm not the biggest fan of mnemonic devices just because I'm not the biggest fan of memorizing very specific notes. My thing has always been more so remembering processes rather than necessarily notes themselves. And so like for me, usually if I'm going to memorize anything, I will usually remember like one of the notes. So like for example, you could memorize the G, you could also memorize the F, and then just understand that every single note, every single one of these notes that are outside of it, they're just skips away, right? So like for example, if I'm starting on F and I need to figure out the line below it, well, that's just a skip below, a skip to the left of F. And then keep going down skips. And skips, of course, the reason why they're called skips is because we're skipping over the letters in between. Now, going down is a little bit harder because you have to go through the alphabet backwards, but it's a good skill to kind of develop for sure. Now, of course, these space notes are just the notes that show up in between these line notes. So like, for example, between G and B, that space is A. Between B and D, it's C. Between D and F, it's E. And then between F and A, it's G. That being said, you could technically just memorize the line notes and you'd be fine just with that. But we'll go ahead and do the space notes here nonetheless. So the first space, and there are 4 spaces in total. First space here is going to be this one, which is A. Second space is going to be C. Then the third space is going to be E. And I've already run out of space, but the fourth space will end up being G. So those are your 4 space notes. Again, as you'll notice, when we go from space to space, we're skipping over the lines that are in between, okay? And so that's why we're, of course, skipping certain letters, okay? But this in total here is, of course, going to be your lines and then your spaces. So G, B, D, F, A, and then A, C, E, G. The mnemonic device that oftentimes people will use for this one is all cows eat grass. That is usually the mnemonic that we end up using for this one. But again, if you remember from your bass staff that this is F, you'll know that the spaces surrounding it, the one below it is E, and then the one is G right there. So you already have like 2 of the notes there. And then again, you just have to go skips down from there in order to figure out where the rest of the notes are. So just keep in mind that when you're going from lines to lines, there are always skips. When you're going from spaces to spaces, there are always skips as well, okay?